Imani Carter stepped into Brooklyn High School with quiet determination and an air of hidden strength, completely unaware that this day would mark the beginning of a dramatic confrontation that would change her life. As soon as she descended the steps of the yellow school bus, her dark eyes met a sea of curious, suspicious stares. Imani had spent most of her life blending into the background, quietly enduring the sting of racial prejudice. But today, something in her stirred. Almost immediately, Ashley Mitchell, a tall, impeccably dressed white girl with flawless platinum curls and an icy demeanor, fixed her gaze on Imani as if marking her territory. Ashley, who had long ruled these halls with an iron fist, believed that Imani, the quiet new girl from Chicago, would serve as the perfect target to reinforce her social power and racist agenda. Throughout the crowded corridors of Brooklyn High, malicious whispers and condescending laughter followed Imani like a dark cloud. Every disparaging remark about her accent, her modest clothing, and her very skin color felt like another lash against her already fragile heart. Despite the hurt and the trembling in her hands, Imani maintained a calm silence. Yet beneath that unassuming exterior lay a secret weapon. Years of rigorous training at her father's old gym in Chicago had instilled in her a disciplined resilience and a readiness to fight back when pushed too far. Each step she took down the hall was measured, as if she were quietly preparing for a storm that had been building inside her for far too long. Ashley, flanked by her two loyal cohorts, Brianna and Courtney, made sure that every slight and every insult was amplified in front of a captivated audience. Their cruel tactics, filled with calculated malice, were designed to break Imani's spirit and remind everyone of the rigid social order they lived by. The very atmosphere in the school thickened with tension as Imani's silent endurance was misinterpreted as defiance, a challenge to Ashley's authority. With every passing moment, the hostility escalated until it was impossible to ignore the brewing conflict. The hallways, usually filled with the buzz of typical teenage chatter, now resonated with an undercurrent of imminent reckoning. In that charged environment, Imani's inner turmoil grew. The memory of every hurtful word, every derisive look, and every unjust whisper kindled a fierce resolve within her. She vowed that one day she would no longer allow herself to be the silent victim. Instead, she would transform her years of pain into an explosion of righteous retribution that would leave the entire school in awe. Deep inside, Imani knew that the time for passive endurance had passed, and that a moment of glorious comeback was on the horizon. A moment that would overturn the cruel hierarchy established by Ashley and her cronies. As the final bell rang for the day, Imani walked away with a quiet promise echoing in her heart, one that would one day lead to a spectacular retaliation so bold and magnificent that even the most hardened onlookers would exclaim in disbelief. Her resolve was set like concrete, and while the day had been filled with bitterness and cruelty, it had also sown the seeds of a revenge that would not only shatter the oppressive power structure of Brooklyn High, but also redefine her identity as a strong, resilient woman. Imani Carter quietly left the classroom after the bell rang, her calm exterior belying the storm raging inside her. In that moment, she knew Brooklyn High would not grant her the peaceful school year she so desperately craved. Every step she took carried the weight of past hurts and the promise of a reckoning. Imani had long learned that silence was survival, yet today, that very silence had ignited something dangerous in Ashley Mitchell. Ashley had already declared Imani her target, and the longer Imani maintained her quiet dignity, the more Ashley's impatience grew. She was not used to being ignored, and the idea that someone could defy the rigid social order she had built at this school sent a shiver down Ashley's spine. Lunchtime at Brooklyn High was never just about eating. It was a battleground where the pecking order was ruthlessly enforced. As Imani stepped into the bustling cafeteria, the atmosphere shifted. Every pair of eyes seemed to be calculating her every move, waiting for a sign of vulnerability. Imani chose a distant corner table, a place where she could be alone yet still remain visible enough to be marked. It was here that Ashley began to execute her cruel plan. With a dismissive tilt of her head, Ashley signaled her loyal followers, Brianna and Courtney, to join her in the act of public humiliation. In a display meant to reinforce her dominance, Ashley approached Imani's table with deliberate arrogance. Holding a full cup of juice, she forced her presence upon Imani, her voice low but piercing as she mocked. You look a bit lonely, don't you? Why sit all the way over here in the corner?" Brianna and Courtney's laughter filled the air, joining the chorus of disdain from the watching crowd. Imani, however, kept her head bowed and her expression impassive. The room fell into a thick, expectant silence as Ashley deliberately tilted her cup, spilling the dark red liquid across Imani's tray. The juice cascaded over the food and dripped onto the table, an act as calculated as it was malicious. The laughter that had erupted was short-lived. Imani slowly placed her spoon on the tray and rose with deliberate grace. With a steady gaze and measured steps, she picked up the tray stained by Ashley's cruelty and walked to the trash bin at the far corner of the room. In that moment, the entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. The once raucous room turned eerily quiet as Imani's composure unsettled even her most confident tormentor. When Imani glanced back at Ashley, her eyes were cold and unwavering, a look that spoke of both sorrow and unyielding determination. Ashley felt an unfamiliar tremor of unease. The power she had so carefully constructed began to crumble under the weight of Imani's silent defiance. Whispers filled the room as students exchanged uneasy looks, and Ashley suddenly found herself at the center of an unanticipated shift in authority. Her loyal friends Brianna and Courtney now wore expressions of uncertainty instead of smug superiority. Ashley's carefully maintained image of control was slipping, and, for the first time, she felt a genuine fear that her reign might be over. As Imani returned to her seat with her backpack slung over one shoulder, the atmosphere had undeniably changed. Ashley's mind raced with a bitter mix of anger and disbelief. In that charged moment, Imani Carter was no longer just the quiet new girl from Chicago. She had become the embodiment of resilience, a force that would soon unleash a magnificent revenge. The halls of Brooklyn High would soon tremble under the weight of a retribution so spectacular that even the most hardened onlookers would be left in awe. Imani Carter had always believed that keeping her head down was the safest way to survive, but now, as she walked the familiar hallways of Brooklyn High, a storm was brewing that would shake the very foundations of the cruel social order. Ashley Mitchell, who once ruled these corridors with a fierce and unyielding grip, now found herself troubled by a disconcerting feeling. That day, as she trudged along with her usual entourage, Ashley realized with a sinking heart that her power was slipping through her fingers like water through a sieve. Deep down, she wondered if perhaps she wasn't as invincible as she had always believed. The thought nagged at her like a small, persistent cut, one that grew more painful with every passing minute. Ashley's insecurity was new and unfamiliar, and it gnawed at her with a quiet intensity. Over the next few days, the subtle snickers and whispered rumors escalated into a relentless campaign of bullying directed at Imani. In every class and hallway, Ashley and her cronies made sure Imani felt the weight of their disdain. In class, Ashley would sit next to Imani and lean in to whisper cruel, fabricated stories meant to humiliate her in front of everyone. Every word was a calculated barb, a needle pricking Imani's already fragile spirit. Yet Imani remained as composed as ever, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, not betraying even a flicker of the pain she felt. It was this very stoicism that stoked the flames of Ashley's growing frustration. Gym class, usually a time when students could burn off nervous energy, turned into another stage for Ashley's cruelty. On that fateful morning, as the students gathered on the field for warm-ups, Ashley made sure that her brother Zach Mitchell, the admired captain of the football team with his broad shoulders and confident smile, and his mischievous friend Luke Rodriguez, known for his unpredictable antics, joined in on the torment. Imani, always choosing a quiet corner away from the chaos, was suddenly confronted by the duo. Zach, with a look that spoke of both authority and malice, intentionally slowed his pace as they ran, forcing Imani to dodge and swerve. Luke took every opportunity to bump into her shoulder as they passed, each nudge enough to make Imani lose her balance for a split second. Every bump, every deliberate obstruction felt like a public declaration of her inferiority. Yet, Imani never allowed herself a reaction. Her calm, steady gaze and unwavering poise in the face of such deliberate provocation only deepened the unsettling disquiet within Ashley. As the gym class drew to a close, Imani left the field with the same quiet dignity that had defined her presence all year. Her silent endurance was noticed by everyone. Students who had once joined in the snickering now exchanged surprised glances and hushed whispers. "That's strange," some murmured. "She isn't even flustered." It was a sentiment that only intensified Ashley's inner turmoil. The more she saw Imani's calm defiance, the more Ashley's pride was wounded. It was as if Imani's very existence, her refusal to be broken by a barrage of cruelty, was a direct challenge to everything Ashley had built at Brooklyn High. Determined to regain control, Ashley decided it was time to escalate her tactics in a way that would leave no doubt about who ruled this school. The cafeteria, a place where the power dynamics were on full display during lunch, became the setting for her final ruthless act. That day, with an icy determination, Ashley entered the crowded cafeteria, accompanied by Brianna and Courtney. Imani had, as always, taken her seat at the far corner of the room, a quiet, secluded spot meant to shield her from unwanted attention. As Ashley strode confidently to the center of the room, all eyes turned toward her. Her every step was measured and deliberate, designed to remind everyone of her authority. The tension in the room was palpable as she made her way directly toward Imani's table. At first, Ashley moved as if by chance, casually passing by Imani's table. But then, in a sudden burst of calculated cruelty, she increased her speed and deliberately bumped into Imani's shoulder with the full force of her body. The impact was jarring, and in an instant Imani's tray flew out of her hands, sending food and a generous splash of dark red sauce scattering across the linoleum floor. A sharp, discordant sound echoed throughout the hushed cafeteria. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen in anticipation. Ashley's eyes gleamed with a smug, triumphant light as she pretended to feign surprise, exclaiming loudly, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Didn't see you." Her voice dripped with sarcasm, and the initial laughter from a few onlookers soon gave way to a deep, uncomfortable silence. What happened next was something no one had expected. Imani, with a calm that bordered on the supernatural, did not react with anger or humiliation. Instead, she simply stood up, her posture as straight as a soldier's, and without a single word began gathering the scattered pieces of her meal. Every movement was precise and dignified, a quiet defiance in the face of unrelenting cruelty. The silence in the cafeteria grew even thicker as everyone watched Imani's measured response. For a long moment, all eyes were locked on the two figures facing each other, a battle of wills with stakes higher than anyone could imagine. Imani's eyes met Ashley's with a gaze so cold and unwavering that it sent shivers down the spines of those watching. The look was not one of anger or embarrassment, but rather one of profound, unyielding control. It was as though Imani had peered into Ashley's very soul and exposed the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. For the first time that day, Ashley felt a creeping fear, an unfamiliar sensation that made her hand tremble as she clutched her water glass. The power that had always come so naturally to her now felt like a fragile illusion, threatened by the steadfast resilience of the quiet girl from Chicago. As the murmurs in the cafeteria began to swell into a cacophony of astonishment and disbelief, Ashley found herself isolated in her own self-made prison of insecurity. The whispers were no longer about Imani. They were about Ashley and the startling realization that she might not be invincible after all. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. "Imani isn't scared at all." Others added, "Maybe she's even stronger than we thought." Each word struck Ashley like a blow, chipping away at the empire of cruelty she had so painstakingly built. In that moment, as the cafeteria fell into an uneasy hush, Imani's defiant composure sent a clear message to everyone present. She was not the broken, timid new girl everyone assumed her to be. Instead, she was a force of nature, a quiet, resolute warrior ready to stand up against injustice. That day marked a turning point not only for Imani, but for the entire student body of Brooklyn High. The scales of power were beginning to tip, and the unchallenged reign of Ashley Mitchell was now in serious jeopardy. As the lunch period wore on, Ashley retreated to a quiet corner of the hall, her mind racing with thoughts of lost control and impending consequences. She could feel the once solid foundation of her authority shaking beneath her feet. Every time she recalled Imani's cool, defiant stare and that subtle, mysterious smile, her heart pounded with a mix of anger, fear, and bitter envy. For Ashley, who had always prided herself on being the unchallenged queen of Brooklyn High, the realization that she might be losing her grip was both humbling and horrifying. The very thought of someone, especially someone as unassuming as Imani Carter, undermining everything she had worked so hard to achieve, was intolerable. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Brooklyn High was charged with a palpable tension. The subtle cruelty that had defined Ashley's interactions with Imani had transformed into something far more vicious and overt. Every class, every corridor, every lunch period became a battleground where the two clashed, silently but powerfully. Imani's quiet defiance, which once evoked pity from a few and admiration from others, now stirred something deeper, a simmering hope among the students that perhaps the oppressive reign of bullying could finally be overthrown. Meanwhile, Ashley's internal struggle intensified. Each time she encountered Imani's unflinching gaze, Ashley's mind was flooded with memories of every moment when she had felt invincible, only to have that illusion shattered by a single, unwavering look. The cruelty she had once wielded with ease now seemed like a flimsy shield against a storm of insecurity brewing inside her. In a desperate bid to reassert her authority, Ashley began to push even harder, orchestrating more public humiliations and harsh pranks. But with every act of cruelty, the more the eyes of the school turned away from her, and the more Imani's quiet resistance grew into a symbol of hope and dignity. It was clear to everyone that the power dynamic at Brooklyn High had irrevocably changed. Imani Carter, with her calm and unyielding demeanor, had become the unlikely beacon of strength for those who had long suffered in silence. And though Ashley continued to try to enforce her reign through fear and intimidation, the once unquestioned bully now found herself standing on unstable ground. The whispers and side glances in the hallways, the sympathetic looks from students who had once been mere bystanders, all combined to create a shift in the atmosphere, a shift that hinted at a revolution of kindness and justice. In that charged environment, Imani's silent resolve promised that the days of unchecked cruelty were numbered. A day was coming when the scales of power would be balanced by a spectacular act of retribution, one that would not only silence the bullies, but also fill the hearts of the onlookers with awe. A day when the quiet, dignified strength of one young woman would inspire an entire community to stand up against injustice. And as Imani Carter continued her day with a quiet grace that belied the turmoil around her, it was clear that her journey was just beginning. A journey that would soon lead to a magnificent and unforgettable comeback. A comeback that would forever change the narrative at Brooklyn High. Imani Carter stepped out of Brooklyn High that afternoon with a heavy heart, feeling the weight of every judgmental glance and whispered remark follow her like an unwanted shadow. The moment she crossed the school gates, away from the prying eyes and murmurs of her peers, the brief spark of confidence she had mustered earlier began to flicker and fade. Every step felt slower than the last, as she struggled with the bitter truth that the cruelty she had faced was far from over. It was in that silent, somber moment that Imani's heart sank, burdened not only by the sting of racial prejudice, but also by the knowledge that the power dynamics she had hoped would keep her safe were shifting in a way that left her feeling increasingly isolated and vulnerable. When Imani finally reached the modest house at the end of a quiet street, a place that had always offered her refuge from the harsh realities of the world, she barely managed to push open the front door before collapsing onto the old familiar sofa in the living room. With her hand trembling as it covered her face, she closed her eyes and allowed the pain to wash over her. Memories of her past in Chicago came flooding back, unbidden and vivid. 2 years ago, at a school where she had once believed she could blend in unnoticed, a girl named Erica had tormented her relentlessly. Erica's constant provocation had built up until, one fateful day, Imani lost control and reacted with a ferocity that shocked everyone. In that single, heart-wrenching moment, the martial arts skills her father had painstakingly taught her became a double-edged sword. While they were meant for self-defense, they had instead unleashed a force that left Erica seriously injured and Imani burdened with a deep, lingering regret. Since that day, Imani had sworn to herself that she would never again allow her emotions to spiral out of control, that she would never again hurt someone who had wronged her. Yet here she was, her inner turmoil threatening to undo the calm she so desperately clung to. It wasn't long before the sound of familiar footsteps signaled the return of her father, Marcus Johnson, who had just come back from his own martial arts training session. Marcus, a former professional fighter whose promising career was cut short by a devastating injury, had always been more than just a parent to Imani. He was her mentor, her rock, and the source of the strength that pulsed quietly within her. As he entered the living room, his keen eyes immediately took in the distress written all over his daughter's face. Setting his worn leather bag aside, he sat beside Imani on the time-worn sofa and spoke in a voice that was both warm and firm. "What happened at school today, sweetheart?" he asked gently, his tone conveying genuine concern and unspoken understanding. With a heavy sigh and hesitance that betrayed her inner conflict, Imani recounted every painful detail. From the day she first arrived at Brooklyn High and caught the attention of Ashley Mitchell, to the subtle bullying that had gradually morphed into overt acts of cruelty. She described how Ashley and her cronies had gone out of their way to single her out, to remind her at every turn that she did not belong. Imani's voice wavered as she spoke about the humiliating incident in the cafeteria, where a cup of dark red juice had been maliciously spilled on her tray, and about the relentless, calculated verbal attacks that had left her feeling more isolated than ever. In a quiet, almost defeated whisper, she admitted, "I don't know how much longer I can stay calm, Dad. I'm scared that if I keep enduring this, I'll lose control again, just like I did in Chicago." Marcus's gaze softened, with both love and stern resolve. Placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, he reminded her, "Miha, I understand your fear. I know you never wanted to hurt anyone, and I taught you martial arts not to make you a fighter, but to help you protect yourself with control and honor. You don't start a fight, but you have to be the one to end it. Sometimes, if you just endure in silence, those who hurt you will think they can do so without consequence. You have the strength to stand up for yourself, without losing who you are." His words, filled with a quiet wisdom born of hard-earned experience, resonated deeply with Imani. In that moment, she realized that staying silent forever would only allow her tormentors to continue their reign of cruelty unchecked. That night, as the house grew quiet and the shadows lengthened across the living room, Imani's thoughts churned with the echoes of her father's advice. She knew that she had to find a way to reclaim her power, not through reckless violence, but through a measured response that would finally put an end to the relentless bullying. The next morning at school, the atmosphere had changed perceptibly. The usual hum of whispered gossip and the soft rustle of papers in the hallways was replaced by an air of tense expectancy, as if every student sensed that something monumental was about to occur. In the days that followed, Imani found herself caught in a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Her resolve was hardened by the painful memories of her past, yet the weight of isolation and the relentless bullying gnawed at her like a persistent ache. Every time she recalled her father's gentle yet firm words, "You didn't start this fight, but you have to be the one to end it," she felt a renewed surge of determination. Imani knew that by enduring in silence, she was only giving her tormentors the upper hand. It was time to step out of the shadows and reclaim her dignity, even if it meant facing the very person who had long embodied the cruelty of the school, the unyielding Ashley Mitchell. As the afternoon approached and the final bell loomed, Imani's mind raced with plans and possibilities. The challenge set by Ashley was not merely a test of physical endurance, but a battle of wills. A chance for Imani to finally put an end to the constant barrage of insults and demeaning acts that had defined her existence at Brooklyn High. The thought of confronting Ashley, of standing up and refusing to be humiliated any longer, filled her with both fear and an unexpected excitement. She realized that this confrontation could be the catalyst for a long-awaited change, a shift in power that would resonate far beyond the confines of the school. With a deep, steadying breath, Imani resolved that once the final bell rang, she would make her way to the spot behind the gym where the challenge awaited her. She knew that this was the moment she had been dreading, yet also the moment that could finally liberate her from the shackles of fear and silence. Every painful memory, every whispered insult, and every act of cruelty had led her to this very point. In that quiet, determined moment, Imani Carter transformed from a silent victim into a woman ready to stand tall and fight for her rightful dignity. The day ended in a whirlwind of anticipation, and as Imani walked down the long, deserted hallway after school, her steps were measured and resolute. The promise of the upcoming confrontation echoed in her mind as she recalled her father's loving embrace and his unwavering belief in her strength. Though her heart pounded with nervous energy, she felt a spark of hope, a belief that this battle would not only define her future, but also serve as a powerful statement against injustice and cruelty. In that singular, fateful moment, Imani understood that her journey was far from over. The challenge set forth by Ashley Mitchell was the final provocation that would compel her to take a stand, to end the cycle of bullying once and for all, and to reclaim the power that had been so unjustly denied her for far too long. That evening, the sky over Brooklyn was a dull gray, as if even the clouds sensed the weight of the impending reckoning. Imani Carter stepped out of her last class with a burning determination in her heart. Every step she took echoed on the tiled hallways, her pulse quickening not from fear but from the resolve to face the cruelty she had long endured. At the sports field behind the school, a small crowd had gathered, their whispers charged with anticipation and a hint of pity for the quiet girl who had suffered endless racial slurs and bullying. In the center of the crowd, Ashley Mitchell stood with an arrogant smile, flanked by Brianna, Courtney, Zach, and Luke, all ready to enforce the unjust hierarchy she had built. Ashley mocked Imani in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, calling her a scared little mouse and daring her to show up so she could finally learn her place. The tension was palpable as Imani met Ashley's gaze with a cool and resolute stare. In that moment, Imani declared calmly, "I'll be there," and the silence that followed was deafening. When Zach and Luke charged, Imani moved with astonishing agility, swiftly turning their aggression against them. As Ashley's confidence crumbled before the astonished crowd, Imani made it clear that she would no longer be a victim and that justice would be served on her own terms. Imani Carter had always been alert to potential threats, a skill instilled by her devoted father, who taught her that true strength comes from inner resilience. When Ashley Mitchell, the once formidable bully known for her icy cruelty and racial disdain, reached out to touch Imani's back, the transformation was instantaneous. In a flash, as swift as lightning, Imani sidestepped gracefully, seizing Ashley's wrist and twisting her body so expertly that Ashley lost her balance and nearly fell to the ground. Yet Imani did not let her adversary hit the floor. Instead, she held Ashley in a precarious position, forcing her to face her own vulnerability. Leaning close with a voice as cold and sharp as a knife, Imani whispered, "You were never strong, and you'll never control me." Those words shattered the illusion of power Ashley had built over the years. In that moment, the gathered students witnessed a profound reversal of fortune. Former allies of Ashley, Brianna, Courtney, Zach, and Luke, looked away in silent pity as Ashley staggered off, overwhelmed by isolation and shame. Imani's decisive act reclaimed her dignity and signaled a new era at Brooklyn High, where respect is earned through courage, a legacy of hope endures. Imani Carter never let her guard down, a lesson learned through hardship and rigorous training. When Ashley Mitchell finally fell silent, Imani turned and walked away, leaving Ashley amid the focused stares of every student at Brooklyn High. Imani's steps were light and serene, radiating dignity and calm determination as she chose self-respect over petty revenge. Meanwhile, Ashley sat frozen in the cafeteria, engulfed in shame and isolation. The power that once made her invincible had crumbled into nothingness, leaving only a bitter void. As Imani stepped outside, the gentle sunlight warmed her face, soothing deep wounds and promising a brighter future for everyone who had suffered under Ashley's oppressive rule. Her resolute message spread quickly through the halls. True power does not lie in bullying or control, but in inner strength, unwavering self-respect, and quiet courage. Students began to view Imani not as a contender for power, but as a beacon of hope and genuine resilience. In that transformed atmosphere, every whispered word carried newfound meaning. Now, as you reflect on this tale, ask yourself, if you were in Imani's shoes, how would you confront injustice? Please like, share, subscribe to help spread this message of true strength and honor.